My graduation party was supposed to be a celebration, a moment of joy and accomplishment. I had just finished thanking everyone for coming, still riding the high of finally being done with college, when my mother, standing in the center of the living room with a wine glass in hand, cleared her throat. Then, loud enough for the entire room to hear, she declared, "Since I paid for your education, you owe me half your salary forever." At first I laughed. A real, full-bodied laugh because the idea was absurd. Who says something like that at their own child's graduation party? But my amusement faded quickly when she reached into her bag, pulled out a folder, and handed it to me with the composure of a debt collector. "You can laugh all you want," she said, her voice saccharine yet firm. "But I had this drawn up a while ago. It's legally binding." Still half convinced this was some kind of elaborate joke, I opened the folder. But what I found inside sent a cold shock through me. It was a detailed contract meticulously outlining every expense she had ever covered. Tuition, housing, textbooks, even gas money and food I had eaten during holidays. And on the last page was a clause that made my stomach churn. If I refused to sign, my mother reserved the right to take legal action against me for failure to reimburse a personal loan. A loan. I swallowed hard, my pulse pounding in my ears. She had never once mentioned that the money was a loan. Not once. I had asked her multiple times before committing to college if she was sure she was okay covering the costs, and every single time, she had smiled and reassured me. "It's an investment in your future." And now, here she was in front of our family, my friends, and her own colleagues, acting like this was just another casual conversation. I let out a slow, steady breath. "Mom," I said, my voice calm but firm, "you never told me this was a loan." She tilted her head slightly, feigning surprise. "Oh, sweetie, of course it was. You didn't think I was just giving you that money, did you?" She gave a light laugh, glancing around as if expecting the guests to nod along in agreement. "You're my child, but you're also an adult now. And adults pay their debts." I stared at her, my grip tightening around the folder. The weight of what was happening pressed down on my chest. Then, from the corner of the room, my father finally spoke. "Well, actually," he said, his voice smooth and measured. He motioned toward the man standing beside him. "That's not how this works." The entire room turned toward them. My mother stiffened. "Her lawyer?" "No, my dad's lawyer." The man, a sharp-dressed professional with graying hair, stepped forward, adjusting his glasses as he opened a folder of his own. "Ms. Carter," he addressed my mother formally, "we were made aware of this contract a few weeks ago. After reviewing its details, I'd like to clarify a few things for your son before he makes any decisions." I blinked, stunned. Dad knew. Dad had seen this coming. And he had prepared for it. My mother's expression remained frozen, but I could see her fingers tightening around her wine glass. The lawyer continued, his voice precise and unwavering. "First, you cannot legally demand repayment without a signed agreement in place before tuition was paid. Since no pre-existing contract or promissory note exists, your claim of a loan is unfounded." My mother blinked. "Excuse me?" "Second," he went on, unbothered by her outrage, "even if this were considered a loan, verbal agreements regarding financial support from a parent to a child are rarely upheld in court, especially when substantial evidence suggests that the money was given without any expectation of repayment." My breath caught in my throat. My dad had come prepared with receipts. My mother's face darkened. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "I have proof. Emails. Text messages." The lawyer didn't flinch. "I've reviewed them." His voice was smooth, almost bored. "And none of them state that your son was required to repay you. In fact, multiple messages show you reassuring him that you were covering the cost as a parent, not as a lender." The color drained from my mother's face. My father crossed his arms. "So," he said, his tone unreadable, "if you really want to take this to court, we can. But I don't think you'll like the outcome." The room was silent. My mother opened her mouth, then shut it. Her eyes darted around, realizing, too late, that every single person in the room had just witnessed what happened. Her friends, her coworkers, our relatives. They had seen her try to ambush me, and they had seen her get shut down in an instant. Panic flickered in her expression. This wasn't how she had imagined it playing out. She had expected to corner me into signing. She had assumed I'd be too shocked or too ashamed to argue in front of all these people. But she hadn't expected my father to be 10 steps ahead of her. She wasn't done yet, though. Her lips curled into a brittle smile, but her voice shook with barely restrained fury. "Oh, I see how it is," she said, eyes burning into mine. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" She took a slow step closer, her tone almost sweet, but her words laced with venom. You think you can just take from me and then walk away? I shook my head. Mom, I never took anything from you. You offered. Her face twisted. Her mask cracked. You are so ungrateful, she spat, her voice rising. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? She turned to the crowd, hand trembling, voice pitching into a desperate plea. I raised this child alone. I worked 2 jobs. I sacrificed so much for him. My father scoffed. You had full custody and refused to let me help. Don't act like you did this alone. The room froze. And that was when it clicked. This wasn't about money. It was about control. My mother had used money as a leash, keeping me tethered to her. She had made me feel like I owed her something, like my entire existence was a debt I could never fully repay. And now that I was free, now that I had graduated and could finally start my own life, she was desperate to pull me back in. But she was losing. Her hands curled into fists. Her face contorted in fury. And then, in a final, shaking whisper, she hissed, "You'll regret this." Before I could even respond, she grabbed her purse and stormed out. The second the door slammed behind her, my legs nearly gave out. My dad's hand landed gently on my shoulder, grounding me in the moment. You okay? He asked, his voice steady. I exhaled shakily, my hands still trembling from everything that had just unfolded. I don't know, I admitted, the weight of the confrontation still pressing on my chest. My dad gave me a small, knowing smile. Don't worry, this isn't over. And he was right, because my mother, she wasn't done yet. And what she did next was so much worse. She had stormed out of my graduation party humiliated, but I knew her well enough to understand that she wouldn't let it go. And I was right. Just 2 weeks later, I received a letter from a lawyer. At first, I assumed it was junk mail. But when I glanced at the sender's address, my stomach twisted into knots. It was a demand letter from an attorney my mother had hired, claiming that I owed her $176,000 for educational expenses and associated costs. And if I didn't pay, she was threatening to sue me. I stared at the letter, barely able to breathe. She had actually done it. She had actually gone to a lawyer and tried to drag me to court. I called my dad immediately, my voice unsteady as I read the letter out loud. When he saw it, he didn't even look surprised. I figured she'd try something like this, he said, shaking his head. She doesn't know when to stop. That's when his lawyer stepped in again. She doesn't have a case, he reassured me, his voice calm and confident. But if she's determined to drag this through the courts, we might have to counter it in a way that ensures she never tries this again. I swallowed hard. What do you mean? The lawyer gave me a small, knowing smile. We're not just going to defend you, he said. We're going to hit back. For most of my life, my dad had stayed quiet, letting my mother control the narrative. They had gone through a messy divorce when I was little, and she had done everything in her power to keep me away from him. She had told me he didn't care, that he never wanted to help, that she had done everything alone. That was a lie, because when we started preparing our counter case, my dad showed me the truth. He had tried to help. He had sent money, thousands of dollars in child support, additional contributions for my education, and repeated attempts to ease the financial burden. But every single time, my mother had refused to accept it. She wanted control. If he contributed, she lost the ability to say, I did this all on my own. She needed to be the martyr, the sole provider, the one who held all the power over me. And now, after rejecting all of my father's help for years, she was trying to extort me for money she had refused to take from him in the first place. When her lawsuit officially landed in court, my dad's lawyer didn't just file a defense. We sued her back for fraud, emotional distress, and misuse of funds. Because during our investigation, we uncovered something that made my blood run cold. She hadn't even used all the money she claimed to have spent on my education. Yes, she had paid for my tuition, but the numbers didn't add up. And then we found the truth. During those 4 years, my mother had taken out additional student loans in my name. Loans I never even knew about. And they were for way more than my tuition actually cost. She had been pocketing the extra money. And when we presented that evidence to the court, everything fell apart for her. The case dragged on for months, but in the end, she lost. Not only did the judge throw out her case against me, but she was ordered to pay back every penny of the fraudulent loans she had taken out under my name. She tried to argue. She tried to cry her way out of it. But the evidence was airtight. And when the verdict was read, she turned to me, her expression twisted with pure hatred. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You betrayed me." I just stared at her, finally seeing her for what she really was. "You did this to yourself," I said simply. After that, she completely spiraled. She called me, texted me, begged me to reconsider. When that didn't work, she changed tactics. She started smearing me, telling anyone who would listen that I was a selfish, ungrateful son who had sued his own mother. She spread the story to her friends, our relatives, even my old teachers. But it didn't work, because the truth was out, and no one believed her anymore. Her reputation was ruined. Her finances were a disaster. She tried to appeal the case, but she couldn't afford another lawyer. And me? I walked away. Free. Free from the guilt. Free from the manipulation. Free from the debt she had tried to trap me in. For the first time in my life, I could breathe. She had lost. And not just in court. She lost everything. Her case, her reputation, her financial security. But even after all that, she still couldn't let it go. Because people like her? They don't stop. Not until they have nothing left to lose. A few months later, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. When I checked the message, my stomach twisted. It was her. Her voice was shaky, almost desperate. "Hey, sweetie. I know things have been rough between us, but I really need to talk to you. It's important." I didn't call back. A week later, she showed up at my job. I was finally building my life, settling into my first post-grad job at a decent company. And there she was, standing in the lobby like she belonged there. My stomach dropped. I pulled my manager aside, explained everything. Security escorted her out within minutes. That night, she sent me an email. The subject line, "Please read." I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the best of me. It was long, full of guilt-tripping and emotional manipulation. She said she was struggling because of the lawsuit, that she had lost her job because of what people had heard, that she was in debt and couldn't afford rent. And then came the real reason for the email. She wanted me to help her financially. I laughed. Out loud. After everything she had done, after trying to trap me in a lifetime of debt, now she wanted me to bail her out? She ended the email with, "You owe me. After everything I've done for you." No, I didn't owe her a damn thing. But my dad, he had one last move to make. While she had been focused on suing me for money, she forgot one important thing. The fraudulent loans she had taken out in my name? That was a federal crime. And someone who had heard her own words, reported her. One day, I got a call from my dad. "She's been arrested. Identity theft. Fraud. And the government? They don't take that lightly." She served time. Not long, but long enough. She lost everything she had tried to control. And me? I built a life without her. No guilt. No manipulation. Just freedom.